A very good afternoon, uh, to everyone who's joined us today. On behalf of India at 100 Foundation, it's my privilege to welcome you all to the India at 100 Marquee Fireside Chat series, I Have a Dream. Uh, I'm truly honored to welcome our guest speaker for today, Mr. Harshavardhan Neotia, Chairman, AmbujaNeotia Group. Mr. Neotia is a Padma Shri recipient, an entrepreneur, a connoisseur of the arts, and an enthusiast of Indian heritage. His group spans businesses across the realms of real estate, hospitality, healthcare, and education. Mr. Neotia has also been bestowed with the prestigious Banga Bibhushan, the highest civilian honor from the government of West Bengal. He is also a recipient of many awards and he has many titles to his credits. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. I'm also truly honored to welcome Mr. Rajan Navani, Chairman of CII's Council on India at 100, who will be in conversation with Mr. Neotia to share his insights on the theme India at 100, the new growth story. With this, I request Rajan to take over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aparna, and a very warm welcome to you, Harsh. You are not only a pioneering industrialist in shaping what India is today, but you continue, to share your knowledge, your insights, and the actionable work you do to shape the future of what India will be in 2047. You're a very distinguished part of the India at 100 Foundation, which is, really brought together a collaborative group of people to work towards building the Viksit Bharat, and, your contributions, both in your actions as well as the way you are working across states, across the government, across multiple stakeholders in society is really helping our country, in a very significant manner. And I think what we want to do today, Harsh, is to capture your thoughts and keep it as a treasure for us to unlock, because the journey to 2047 is a long journey. We will have to, in the midst of such global uncertainties, in the midst of so many changes in technology, continue to identify the priorities, the opportunities for India, for different stakeholders of our country. And I think, how do we stay true to building and shaping India? Because I think it's a once in a mankind kind of an opportunity. Because never, I think, in the history of the world has a democratically elected country of 1.4 billion people actually transformed itself from a developing country to a developed one. So a lot of next practices, but a lot of best practices, that you have adopted will also be a part of this, and really look forward, to this conversation. So let me begin that,
So first of all, before you, let me first thank you very much for your very generous words. I am not sure I fully deserve everything that you have said, because I live in a lot of the great privilege of being born in the family that I was, and a lot of the achievements that often get credited to me are really reflected glory of many of the works done by my folks. But anyway, since I have been a part of that family and I have a small responsibility to carry forward, I'll be happy to contribute by some thoughts and ideas in this conversation. And it's really an honor to be part of the India at 100 Foundation. So thank you, Rajan. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, thanks, Harsh. Again, I think this is very clearly reflective of your beautiful mind, as I say, because it's a position of stewardship and trusteeship, right? I think even taking generational businesses along, and India, if we go back thousands of years, we've had a rich history, culture, and how we propagate that from one generation to another is really our inner strength, and the roles are different, but we all have to play our role in shaping that India. So, thank you for bringing that perspective, because there are, as we always discuss, there are different roles for everybody to play as we move forward, and each is very important. I just want to start because, this is about I have a dream, right? And it is like, you're waking up on 15th of August, 2047, what's the India you see around you, right? Like, we are in our centenary year, what's your dream for India?
See, on a very fundamental level, the first dream is that we should be shorn of poverty, because that is a scourge that we can ill afford to live with. The fact that some part of our country, though we have much improved in the last few couple of decades, still a part of our country lives below poverty line. And that is perhaps an existence that we cannot really come to terms with. So we need to work towards uplifting that and see that our country is at least there is no one below the poverty line. That's the bare minimum. And that's one of the important milestones that in the short term we need to achieve. The other, of course, is we should we should have some purpose for prosperity, not just prosperity for the sake of it. And we have a civilizational heritage going back to several thousand years. We have a lot to contribute to the world, as we all know. And I think increasingly the world is also recognizing this potential that lies with us. So we need to see that while we prosper, we have a purpose. And that purpose could be a more humane approach. I think Sadhguru in one of his conversations said that we definitely want to be a world power, superpower, but we don't want to be a superpower of dominance. We don't want to be a superpower to say that we are stronger and therefore the weaker shall be subject to our decisions or diktats. So we want to be a superpower of inspiration. We want people to be wanting to be like us, not being forced to be like us. Not be like us, but even have differences, but maybe emulate some of the ideas of a more egalitarian way of distribution of wealth, the ideas of the way we bond with families, the ideas that we can have diversity and yet unity in purpose. So those are the kind of larger ideas which India has espoused, whether it's the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam or whether Vivekananda's very famous speech in Chicago, where he talked about different religions being different paths leading all to the same ocean. Uh, we need to have that little broad-minded, and which we have. So it's not like we don't have, but that is what I think we need to put as our guiding principle, and perhaps something that the world would be attracted to emulate, particularly more relevant as we see what we see around us now, with so much of strife and so much of pain that is being inflicted uh, for whatever reason, but it is unfortunately there. So the other thing, of course, is that we should have universal access to a few fundamental things, one of which is infrastructure, physical, in terms of safe drinking water, sanitation, housing for all. Many of these goals are aligned with our government's goals, and a tremendous amount of work has happened, and we should just build on that foundation that has already very effectively been laid in our country. Quite encouraging, I would say. And finally, I think we should build institutions more than individuals. We need to create structures, and we need to create institutions that will endure beyond the life of any one particular individual. Because when we are looking at a country, we are looking at continuum, not just about the next 10 years or 20 years, but far beyond that. So whether it's the institutions of judiciary, democracy, the media, the the institutions that provide us with healthcare and sanitation, the way we govern our cities, all of which I think need a framework which is effective, sustainable, and accountable. So I'll stop there.
I know. I think you've covered, such important points here. But I think what you said, right, about purpose and superpower, it's
Yeah.
often shared, and in our India at 100 discussions, we found that India will be a super partner to the world, and that will define superpower.
Right.
Really, the Vasudev Kutumbakam, what you mentioned,
Yes.
and institutions. I mean, you yourself are such a strong institution builder, having really played key roles in so many institutions, especially the one on leadership, with CII, which has actually brought a lot of thinking around that. And really, if we have to think about India's leadership on the global stage, I think it's important for us to think about what are those shifts in leadership, right, Harsh, that we need to be thinking differently about. I mean, a lot of the Western thinking is clear thinking head, clean working hands, but warm caring heart, right, is ingrained in Indian, in the Indian culture or ethos of leadership. But if you were to think of leadership both in India and what India can take to the world, how do you think about that? And of course, we have your institution and many others that can then leverage and build upon that, to create that, because that's a big part of the future, journey for India.
So I read, I think it was Devdutt Patnaik who mentioned this characterizing the human mind, the Indian mind as compared to the Western mind. And I thought it was a very interesting reference. He says, when you go for a meal at a Western outlet, you are served uh, the food in courses. So you have the first course, and then you have a mouth freshener, and then you have another course, maybe a sorbet after that, and maybe another course. And usually one is a protein, one is a fat, one is vegetarian, maybe one is a meat. Uh, there is a sequence which is decided by the chef as to how he wants or he thinks you should experience the food. Whereas the Indian concept of service is a thali. And in the traditional thali that used to be served, the papar and the sweets and the achar and the various sabjis and the dal and the roti all came together and they were placed in front of you. So you decided for yourself which is the combination with which you will eat. So sometimes you would take a little bit of roti and you'd have some dal with it, sometimes a particular sabji with it, sometimes maybe uh, put some achar with it. Sometimes you may even bite into a sweet in the middle of the food just because you want to now have a sweet. And if you see it very interestingly, every morsel became a unique combination because you never did the same kind of dipping. So sometimes you put a little yogurt into it and sometimes you didn't. So almost the flavors that you experienced were several hundred maybe in that one meal because and you had the liberty to make those mixes and matches as you chose. I think the leadership that India can be well defined by the kind that this thali sort of symbolism brings. That we don't want to have a structured leadership, which is one following another as a predetermined sequence of how you should look at life. Because we are such a varied nation, so many cultures, so many dialects, so many ethnicities, so many religions, so much of geography and so much of history. If you put all this together and put it into a structure, it will never work because one part of India doesn't think like another part of India. So it is very important to have this thali leadership where you allow every leader to figure out his choice of how he would like to represent. Having said that, there would be guiding principles of the values, not of the methodologies. So the values of integrity, the values of being truthful, the values of not being violent, the values of living up to your promise, etc. So those will be the values, but allow the leadership to be to flower in a manner that is suitable to that individual because individuals and that's probably our sages also understood this and that's why they allowed in the Indian context people to worship many gods for the simple reason that they thought it's very difficult to unify everyone's mind in a one particular direction. And it's nice to let them choose how they wish to do it. Ultimately, the goal is the same. Let them choose the path. And if there are varied paths, in Ramakrishna used to say in Bengali, Joto moth, toto poth, which means as many views at as many roads, but ultimately they lead to the same goal. So I think that to me would be a very important aspect. The other aspect that I would like to emphasize is that we should promote ethical leadership. And when I say that, it's about instilling in people that success at the cost of ethics is not a sustainable proposition. We often think that success in itself is a goal. I think the process is more important than the end. And it would be, if we can build a country where the leadership says that we'll follow what is the right thing to do, and then wherever it takes us, that's where we will go. The chances are that we as a nation will A, progress better, and B, everyone who's moving in that will be happier, as it is ultimately the goal for every human being. Success is only one of the ways that you think you'll get happiness. But the core purpose that you're all looking for is happiness. Success is only one of those things that we think leading to success will give us happiness. But if you lose happiness in the quest of success, then you're, in a sense, you're defeating the very purpose for which you embarked upon. So that would be my response.
No, and I think it's there's no end to that success and happiness journey, right? One reaches one level, and therefore I think what you said it resonates so well, and therefore the ability for India to to chart out a different path, especially when it comes to business leadership, right? I mean, today we are aspiring to be the third largest economy in the world. We are going to do this through new businesses, new innovative ways. We have a huge young youthful population, many young people, as you and also must be realizing, I see it all the time, want to be job creators rather than job seekers. So creating this new engine of India's growth, which is innovation led, right? And there, what you rightly say, whether it is values and ethics, but still the ability to create something new, something disruptive. How do you think we can really leverage what even our Honorable Prime Minister started, with Startup India, to now actually move to Scale Up India, right? Getting young people deeply involved into this journey of building that India at 100. We often talk about it, but it's easier said than done. So, what are your thoughts on how to leverage this startup ecosystem, or what do we need to do correctly to make that happen?
One of the things that come to my mind is to have a deeper engagement between academia and industry. I think the relationship in India is not as deep as it is perhaps in the West. Many times we have often had this discussion that the students that come out of colleges are skilled, but they are not contexted. They don't have the context of what the industry needs. And therefore, there is an orientation program that they have to undergo before they become useful. Of course, they have developed some skills. Now, how do we make this relationship between industry and academia deeper? And I think it's also very important because we are in a very different world today with internet. We are in a different world with AI. A lot of the stuff that we, as you and I, perhaps when we were in college, and we were expected to know because there was no other way to know it. Today, you don't need to remember or know so many things because it's available at a click of a button. So what you need is basically the ability to process that information. We are so much dependent on rote learning or learning, which is like things which are available to you at a drop of a hat. But what is important is how do you process that information and how do you then make use of that? Ultimately, AI is going to make this processing also so much faster. But I think the human intervention will move one step higher, that you have got processed information, but there is something called intuition, there is something called the X factor, there is something called the human factor, which will have to now start playing a greater role. because analysis will be done more efficiently by the machine. You don't need to process that information in your head anymore. You will get an Excel sheet which will tell you the pros and the cons and the SWOT analysis and everything of every possible option on earth, including biological formulations, chemical formulations, almost anything that you do with a lot of rigor and hard work, which we did, is absolutely unnecessary today because you can do it at a click of a button and much faster. The question then is that what do you do with that raw information, which is not raw actually, it is a digested information, but yet there is a decision making. Will you ultimately go that route? And there are value considerations. There are considerations of empathy, of human aspect, of what it would mean. If the brain could do everything, then you would not need a heart. The fact that, heart, of course, you need it to pump the blood in your system, but that's a more biological thing. But when we talk about it proverbially, we look at the heart as a intuitive part of a human being, or the softer part of it, if I may say. The brain is the more analytical part, which actually says, this is what is good about it, this is what is bad about it, but it doesn't give you the answer as to what is good to do. And that answer comes when you combine analytical skills with the heart. So I think the human beings' need to depend on the heart will increase exponentially in this age, because the mind's work to a great extent will be done by AI and various other tools that are available. And therefore, a developed heart, or a little more prepared heart to handle the complexity of human emotion, the ability to be empathetic, to ability to be, reasonable to all. And it's not about the winner takes all. It's not about the right of the might. It's about that balance where you do acknowledge leadership, you do acknowledge someone's extra abilities, but you don't completely ignore the guy who's weaker in the lot. There is a role for him to also play, just because he's a part of uh, the milieu. He's a human life. And when I say human life, I don't want to exclude animals and plants, because we have to be sensitive to that too. Finally, the balance of this world will be sustainable when there is some sort of a judicious application of the resource allocation. If we overuse any one resource and ignore any one in a very, very deep way, we will create an imbalance, and that will come in the form of nature's fury.
Yeah. No, I think what you have referred to in many ways is again tapping into that inner power that which India has actually nurtured in a way through our Vedic traditions and understood well for the world. What does it take to to be able to bring the best of that, whether one calls it a better heart from emotion, whether it's the spirit behind the human life or everything that exists. I think that's the key part for us to see how we can continue to strengthen that and build on this journey, because again, that's a leadership that India can provide to the world. Thanks, Arjuna. I'm going to move to something you talked about. You mentioned infrastructure earlier, and you yourself, the Neotia group has been a pioneer in social housing, so to say. And we are seeing urban populations expand. We are seeing many people wanting to live as communities together. But community-centric living in cities are a concept that will need to happen correctly, right? As we move forward sustainably. How do you think about some of these things? Not just building buildings, but we are building communities, right? We are nurturing a space where people come together to do better good, right? I mean, progressive societies actually do a lot where there's a lot of support from one another. And you mentioned infrastructure. So when we think of infrastructure over the next 22 years, how should we be thinking as a country? I'm just giving the urban infrastructure side, but any other infrastructure that you think is important and relevant?
So, it starts with how we understand the interdependence of all of us. If we believe that we need a city that is sustainable, that means the employer and the employed should live in close proximity to be able to serve one another. If you, for instance, create a space where only the richy rich live, they will need support teams to help them in terms of house help, in terms of uh, various services, and they provide economic opportunity to other people. Now, we must understand that if they don't live in reasonable proximity to one another, it doesn't work. So, any development, density planning, and one of the things that the social housing scheme was intended to do was to say that there will have to be some cross subsidy between what you build for the rich and use a part of it to subsidize the low income and middle income housing so that you can live in close proximity. And if everyone does that in some manner, then you have a sustainable town because you have a home where all kinds of people can live. And therefore, everyone depends on the other because somebody provides the employment and somebody gets employed. And if they live in close proximity, they become more happy because they have shorter distances to travel. They can get to work and get back home, etc., etc. So the starting point is that. The second is, let's say we make urban spaces. Like for instance, I must say this contribution of this idea came from Mr. Charles Correa when we were building the city center mall in Calcutta. And he said that, listen, the parks and gardens of earlier times have gone into disrepair and they are not well lit. And often middle class families don't want to have their young boys and girls go into parks and gardens at night because of just generally they're not well kept and they're dark and etc. But where do young people meet their friends, maybe even romance their friends? So they said, Mr. Korea told me, much is quite a hilarious conversation. He says, when we build this mall in Calcutta, we must have spaces for young people to come and sit and enjoy. Because you will have a well-lit place, you will have good restrooms and toilets for people to use, you will have parking facilities, and you'll have security. And so parents will not have a problem if young people were to meet their friends in a place which is very public but very well organized. So I thought, my God, I need shoppers here. But what would I do with youngsters? They'd hardly have money anyway. And, he insisted that, no, this is how it should be because that's the right thing to do, not because it is probably commercially viable. He didn't have any argument that these young people will spend money and what if you create large spaces for them, they will come and crowd it out, etc., etc. Anyway, I was too young then to argue with him, and he was such a legend that I kind of half believing what he was saying, half kind of falling into it because of the stature of the man. We built city center. And it was that time the first mall, which was an open mall where the shops were air conditioned, but the rest of the spaces were not. And he insisted that they should not be air conditioned simply because Calcutta has a temperate climate, except for 1 or 2 months in a year when it's warm. The rest of the time and the biggest crowd is in the evenings. It's very comfortable. So why do you want to shut this all up? So anyway, uh, intuitively I was feeling that God knows what he's saying, whether it'll work, not work. But something told me that, what he's saying makes sense, except that I haven't seen it work anywhere. But persuaded by him and a little bit guided by my own conscience, which kind of gave me the feeling that maybe what he's telling is really right. We went and did it. And it became a super hit because lots of people came. And today also, if you go to the city center, hundreds of young people, maybe thousands, are sitting on the steps and just enjoying their time. And of course, occasionally when they want to buy an ice cream or they want to have a cup of coffee, they do that. If they're going to the mall, their parents will tell them that, okay, while you're coming back, you buy this from there, etc., etc. So they do that. But of course, their spending is not significant. But I think it brings a lot of vibrancy and it brings a lot of life to the place. And at least I'm very happy that we were able to contribute a public space within a private space that became people's space. And today that is literally adopted by the city. I'm talking of that neighborhood. Obviously, a mall has a limited reach and purpose. So I think when we look at this in a larger context, we see how little contributions can really allow the not so well-to-do to also enjoy some of the facilities that the well-to-do is really meant for the well-to-do. So this is really where I feel that whether it's in housing, whether it is in other public spaces that we make, including hospitals, there is of course a need for top quality healthcare in our country. We are involved in it. But we do some part of that for free surgeries and for needy and for poor. And I think the same we do in our universities. Well, there are mostly paid students, but I think 20% or 25% are scholarships for students. And that's some of them are at 10%, I think, is not even 1 rupee fee for those who are really needy. And I think if we do, everyone does a little bit of this, I suppose we just work towards making our uh, country a better place.
I mean, I think, both these areas that you mentioned, whether it's education or healthcare, are, the fundamental building blocks that India has to deeply invest in, over the next 2 decades to be able to, truly unlock the power that we talk of. And I think there's a lot of government spending, Harsh, that is happening in these spaces and in so many other areas, right? And that's both at a national level, at the state level, at a, municipal level. How do you personally see, the role of public-private collaboration, right? I mean, because there is a lot of government expenditure, and we've been discussing this even at the India 100 Foundation. How does this collaboration, and if that is the key word with which India will be built into a Viksit Bharat, how, when it comes to social infrastructure, inclusive growth, healthcare ecosystems, education ecosystems in India, how does this work together? Any thoughts, any suggestions you might have, both what can be done today and, maybe over a long term, also kind of continue to be expanding?
So there are many experiments, as you know, tried out for public-private partnership in infrastructure, in housing. We did one social housing initiative with the government of West Bengal. Uh, in healthcare, they often allot you plots where they give you, you have an obligation to do some free healthcare. Nowadays, in many, if you set up a school, you are obligated to provide some seats for disadvantaged people. So that's one. But I think what I would like to address is that still there is a trust deficit between government and private. Both are a little bit wary of each other, particularly when they come together, because everyone thinks that the other doesn't fully understand what is the imperative of that challenge of running that enterprise. Uh, Sometimes you get people and they are so much dependent on the person who's at the moment, at that occasion, where it goes wonderfully. And then, as probably in the private side, there's more continuity. But on the government side, obviously, because of changes of bureaucrats and changes of government, there's a lot of change. And whenever there is a change, there is somebody comes in and he is suspicious of what has happened. Now, this is a problem. And one of the reasons why a lot of companies now fight shy to get into this kind of public-private partnership is how do you sustain it over a long period of time, particularly when all these changes are inevitable. So can we create a greater sense of mutual trust? And I'm sure that both sides have not really walked the talk in some aspect or the other. Private sector may have been wanting, may have at times exploited the situation to their advantage. Public sector may have had, I mean, I'm talking the government in this case might have also had some issues, maybe some uh, historical grievances, etc. So I think somewhere this problem has not allowed this model to become very, very successful. And I think there is a lot of possibility to build on it, provided we find a way to mitigate the trust gap. And I think it is also about creating a certain level of maturity on both sides that to develop our country, this is necessary and probably a better way. And therefore, let us create some mechanisms or structures that don't allow for too much of deviation. But all said and done, it's people, and people run it. And there can be people whom you can feel comfortable with or not comfortable with. How do we create that now? I don't have an easy answer to it. I know this is a problem. And but I know that if we can solve that problem, we can really make a lot of difference.
No, I think, you've talked about this, and this is an issue often discussed, that, creating trust-based society, how do we build? I think one of the key levers Harsh always mentioned is a little more proactive communication, like what you said, more transparency, collaboration, and having the same shared goals, and your earlier part on values, right? Like really having integrity at the core. Each person, if each one does that correctly, it's hard not to have trust, right? But at the same time, it is so hard to build. And again, this is an area where India can stand out differently. We're seeing, like what you rightly said, in many aspects, great progress towards that. But if we don't focus on it as a very important core thing for us to develop, and what you rightly mentioned earlier, institutions can play a very large role, to make that happen. But I think this is a very, very important part that you have touched. If we really want to get to that Viksit Bharat, it is multi-stakeholder and trust being, the one guiding link and factor amongst all being so important. So thank you for that insight. Moving on. When we look at Bharat holistically and we talk of Viksit, one of the areas that I think we need to definitely look at, and which is a big strength of ours, is revitalization of our soft power. Art, culture, heritage, creative economy, which you mentioned a little bit, cultural influence. And I know this is something, Harsh, knowing you, is very personal to you, right? It is something that you believe deeply in. You spend a lot of your effort and time to help bring that to center stage. How take us through a little bit of your thinking on how do we harness this rich heritage, rich culture that we have, and really make it a big part of the future of India as we move forward to 2047.
So this is one part which is really the privilege of being born in the family that I was, because I was I was in a joint family surrounded by different members who were deeply invested in Indian arts in every aspect, whether it was music, it was literature, it was philosophy, spirituality, etc. So I kind of grew up with a lot of uh, artists, community thinkers visiting our home, and have been lucky to have really imbibed a lot of this very, very osmotically without too much of personal effort, really. Uh, so I definitely feel that what India has to offer, I don't think I can really easily think of any civilization that has that much to offer. And we have probably explored every aspect of human endeavor and human experience, not ourselves, but by our sages, who have then left a whole tome of literature for us to learn from and to be inspired by. So there is no dearth of ideas or knowledge, and I don't think I need to add anything to that because I simply can't. What is there is at a level which, even if we implement a small percentage of that, I think we'll have made a huge difference to the world. So coming to how do we make this more prevalent and not known, it's quite incredible to see the kind of effort that is being done in our country. And definitely it has gained a lot of momentum of late, particularly by the Prime Minister and his efforts at focusing on uh, India and focusing on our cultural and civilizational heritage. We are seeing revitalization of temple precincts, not just the temple, not the religious aspect alone, but the entire cultural reawakening that is happening is quite extraordinary. Even if you see the Durga Puja in West Bengal, I mean, I am involved in the arts. I have been to many art biennales in the world, but there is no art exhibition of the quality of what happens in the Durga Puja in West Bengal anywhere in the world. I mean, it is just quite incredible and quite phenomenal. So everything is there. Now the question is, are we sufficiently presenting it to the world? And probably there, tourism has a very big role to play. I think we have just scratched the surface of the tourism potential. Of course, we have the headwinds of all this wars and disruption in flights and all of that. So temporarily, this is a bad word. Tourism and international tourism is a very bad word because who's going to take all the risk at this time? But God willing, this will pass, and God willing, we will come to a happier time. And really, India has every reason to be the melting pot for tourism in the world. We still probably draw less tourists than our neighbor Thailand. Or sometimes people were telling me once that international arrivals are probably less in all our metro cities than it is in Singapore. I don't know whether that's true today, but whatever. Uh, we have a huge potential, absolutely mind-boggling. And that is the safest and surest way to expose this great civilizational heritage to the world. And I can say with a reasonable amount of certainty that most people who would come here and experience this, if we are able to package it properly, present it properly, will be mesmerized by it and will be influenced by it because you can't help but be influenced by it. Not because of anything other than the potency of those ideas and the good feeling it leaves behind. It does not exclude anyone. It does not even tell you you're wrong with what you do. It just tells you here is another way to look at life. And when you present anything with that gentleness of an option, it's very different than when you are instructive, because then you feel somebody is commanding you in a particular direction. The Indian concept is an offer. It's an offer for you to explore. It's not an offer for you to follow. Nor is it an instruction. So I think that is really where the core lies. And if we can do that, we can really um, share our ideas of universal brotherhood, of toleration, of multiplicity of ideas, living, coexisting, of nonviolence, which is very, very important in today's world, um, of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, of being our civilization has always propagated the idea that you succeed, but you see that you carry others along. Uh, it typifies from our joint family system. In a joint family system, everybody was never equal. There were always somebody in the family who was extraordinarily enterprising. There was someone who was probably very academic. There was someone who was very creative. And there's someone who was a laggard and useless. But they all sat on the same dining table and ate the same food. There was egalitarianism in the behavior of everyone to each other. Of course, the guy who was bringing the maximum fame and fortune to the family got more importance. But that didn't mean that the guy who was, let's say, a lazy bum who didn't do anything got excluded. So our joint family actually gave us a very beautiful way of how to look at life and how to look at people. When somebody is disadvantaged, it's not alone that he has chosen that. Sometimes fate has a cruel way of, dealing a bad set of cards to some people, and some people get some really wonderful cards. And I think we need to be mindful that while we have got what we have got, we should not ignore that other guy and leave him to his own. And a little helping hand may not be at the same level at which you do to yourself, but at some level to make it feel that you're not excluded completely. Uh, and I think that is really what we can share with the world, and maybe it can help heal a lot of wounds that we see now being caused around.
Yeah. And at this time, there couldn't be a more powerful message than this, because I think the world needs better understanding and all the aspects, that you just talked about. And this comes, with several decades of practice. It comes with an exposure to a world that takes a generational shift sometimes, for things like this to happen. But high time India took this out, and this is something that will go even beyond 2047, for India to continue to take to the world. And I think it's so important that we do that correctly. And Harsh, has been such a engaging conversation. I can go on and on, but I'm gonna come to a last question. And the people who are going to take this, right, are the young people, right, of India. We are the youngest country in the world by scale, and so much potential. Again, with all of the characteristics that we've talked about over the last 45 minutes that have shaped India, ingrained in them. What is your message to young India, to young entrepreneurs, who want to build institutions, right? You powerfully talked about that. Of course, build companies, we've talked about that. What is your message for that young Indian today, from Harsh, based on your experience and your vision for that generation?
So once when I was hearing an interview of Mr. Warren Buffett, and he was asked this question about his incredible success in Berkshire Hathaway, he said, I'd start by saying that I had an ovarian lottery. I was born white. I was born in America. I was born in a particular time period, and that has contributed most significantly for whatever I was able to do. Had it not been for the fact that I was a white, born in America at that particular time, maybe whatever is my achievement may not have happened. I feel for the young generation, the greatest blessing you have is that you are born in India in this particular time period. Because this is really what I would call maybe the next 2-3 decades of a very, very golden period for India after a very long hiatus. We had things sliding from, let's say, 500-600 years because of various reasons, but more particularly in the last 200 years after the British invasion of our country. So we are once again in that space where we have a robust democracy. We are being seen as we are the third largest, fourth largest economy, almost third largest very soon. We are the fastest growing large economy. We are having this civilizational heritage that we spoke about. The world is now inviting us to the high table, and there is a growing respect for the Indian diaspora that is all over the world and who have achieved incredible success. So we are at a very interesting stage in our life as a nation where we have things generally going well for us. The opportunities to grow our country from as you had rightly said in the very beginning of your introduction, from a developing economy to a developed economy, this is really the defining 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, when we have to leapfrog from one to another. And all the young people are going to be in their 20s to 50s, which is the golden period of anyone's life. So first of all, you're at the most brilliant time that anyone can be. And if what Warren Buffett could achieve in the 60s and 70s and early 80s in the USA, this is what you can do in India at this time. Maybe people who were born in 1940 may not have had been able to, because we were in a different kind of a situation, and we were not really poised for this kind of takeoff that we are now. So that's the first thing. The second, of course, is that we must be mindful that success without values are not sustainable. They may come as a fleeting moment, and sometimes God tricks us by making some shortcut appear very lucrative. But there is, the proverbial snakes and ladder Ludo that we used to play as children. I didn't realize till many years later that it had a philosophical meaning, because when you reached 99 and you are almost feeling that you'll get and win the Ludo race, there's a snake there, and you straight come down to number 2. And sometimes you play the dice and you will look far behind, and then you get some ladder which takes you right up to the top. So life is like that. We are at this moment when we can really take the ladder and go up. And so we have to have integrity. We must do things with values. And we should look at the development of the whole nation, not just a part of it. Often we hear in various economic discussions that some part of India seem to be doing extremely well, but some part of India is left behind. That is bothersome, because we need social equity. We need to have we need to be a tide that lifts all boats. Maybe the bigger boats will be lifted higher and the smaller boats will be lifted less, but the tide must lift all the boats, at least in some proportion. So we need to be mindful of that. So these are the couple of things that I would leave as a thought for the young generation, that take everyone along, look out for that guy who's left behind, hold his hand, even if you can't take him all the way, take him to some distance, while you progress in your own way, and see that you stick to your values. Success is always cyclical. It'll never be permanent, but values can keep you anchored well.
I think great messaging, for the young people. And, given that we're both on Ananta, make your journey from success to becoming significant as one goes forward, more productive. I think great, it's been such a wonderful conversation, Harsh. Not only I think you've shared a vision, but, or your dream for India at 100, but it's a reminder that, the country that will become, honestly, by 2047 is the sum of so many things, right? The institutions we build, the cities or the spaces like you were talking, we design, maybe the culture we protect, or what you just rightly mentioned, the young people we inspire, among so many other things, and all captured, into this one conversation, which is truly very rich, and which, both India and we hope CII will help unlock over the next 22 years at the right time, when, when our country needs this inspiration from the words you have shared. So thank you so much for sparing your time, for having this conversation and sharing your thoughts so candidly, and from a tonality that was very soft, reserved, and I think what I truly enjoyed, and I'm not just saying this for the heck of it, is the spirit of this conversation was the spirit in which you believe India will, provide leadership to the world. The Vasudev Kutumbakam, the collaborative collaboration, at the core, being the family, being so central to what it is. And if we can do all of this, there's nothing that prevents us from not only becoming a Viksit Bharat, but helping the world become a much better world as we move forward. So again, thank you so much, Harsh, for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.